貴殿に誠心誠意の謝意を伝えさせてくれ、ロドスのドクター。私のような故郷を追われた取るに足らない輩を受け入れてくれて感謝する。奇才なる好みであってロドスの事業に貢献できるのであれば喜ばしいものだ。
Codename Ebenholz is a member of the Caprinae race. Their defining characteristics include traits of goats and sheep, most notably by the shape of their horns. Most Caprinae are born within Lithuanian. I'm probably saying that really wrong, but some of the other operators include beeswax and touch. According to his archive files, he's a polite but distant man. He does not seem to enjoy conversations with most people, with only the doctor and a few others being an exception. He's pretty gloomy and does not speak fondly of himself. He's a musician at heart and is known to be proficient with all instruments. Yes, all instruments. Bagpipe, piano, harmonica, stylophone. Anything you could probably think of, chances are he can play it. He enjoys cello the most though, and mainly plays sorrowful music. It is also rumored that he is particularly fond of the flute. He is currently infected, and imaging tests of his internal organs are obscured by abnormal shadows. He ended up at Rhodes Island after the Vyseheim Incident. The official explanation of the Vyseheim Incident, according to Lithuanian, goes as follows. Ebenholz used to be an ordinary student studying music and originium arts at a certain university in his hometown of Vyseheim, a mid-sized city. During an unfortunate incident, Ebenholz became infected with oropathy and had no choice but to withdraw and seek medical help at Rhodes Island. That seems simple enough, right? Now that we've gotten the official information out of the way, let's move on to the actual story of Ebenholz and why I think he's one of the most interesting operators in Rhodes Island. Most of that story is hiding the truth. Ebenholz was not born in Vyseheim whatsoever. Most of his life was spent in Utica. Utica is a small town that is not too special by most means. In Utica, he was known as the Graf Utica, and for those who don't speak German, which is probably most of us, Graf is frequently translated to be similar to a count in reference to nobility. In essence, he was known as the Count of Utica, and because of this, he received a special education fit only for a noble of his class, being proficient in etiquette, literature, originium arts, and most importantly, music. Unlike most music teachers, Ebenholz's teacher let him decide for himself which instrument he wanted to play. Initially, he chose the violin and was praised highly for it. Despite being happy about the compliments, Ebenholz did not respond to them. He was praised for almost everything he did, and most compliments meant nothing. However, these seemed to finally be genuine. To put in his own words, though, "When I saw the instruments, a barrage of foreign concepts and knowledge of how to play them flooded into my brain, as though someone was there ordering me around. Not everything would go smoothly for him. The following day, the teacher looked at him with nothing but scorn," as he recounts. He surmised that his attendant told him part of the truth. The truth was not a happy one either. Utica is a territory that is passed down in the Witch King's lineage, so where does that place our Graf Utica? For those unfamiliar with the Witch King, which is probably mostly everyone, here's a brief rundown, and I say brief in very, very big quotations. At the age of 50, the Caprinae man would be elected by the Lithuanian Kurfürsten. The Kurfürsten were members of the electoral college that would elect the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, so we can assume that they probably had an equivalent role in this story as well. He started out as a ruler who brought prosperity to the country with his knowledge of originium arts, and he was the most powerful caster in the history of Terra. Let's let that sink in for a moment. The most powerful caster literally ever, top of the arts food chain. This came with a downside though. The more he perfected his arts, the less control he had over himself. He eventually succumbed to it all and became an ugly monster with twisted horns who hid himself inside his spire. And to make his reputation worse, he began a reign of terror for his remaining 60 years of rule. It was marked by his violence. He even murdered an entire town as an experiment with his arts. He participated in harassing Colombia through Bolivar's puppet regime, and was the perpetrator of the Battle of the Four Emperors, an event where Lithuania was under threat by the Gaulish Empire. The Gaulish tried to make Lithuania a vassal state, which resulted in a war. 10 years after the war, the Witch King formed a coalition with Ursus to oppose the Gaul, leading to the Battle of the Four Emperors. The end result? The complete annihilation of the Gaulish Empire, which is considered to be one of the most tragic events in Terra's history. Some Gaulish descendant operators include Acid Drop, Astasia, and Phantom. Even after their victory, his terror did not end. With increasing disapproval, citizens eventually decided on a new set of rulers, the Twin Empresses. They are the current leaders of Lithuania and are known as the heroines who slew the evil king inside his spire. They cut off his horns, showed the public his limp corpse. Despite his rule being very, very over, many commoners are still fearful of referring to him directly and thus address him as His Majesty. His followers are known as the Remnants, which seems to be referenced in Ebenholz's second skill, Desolate Echoes. Desolate Echo summons old day remnants on deployable tiles, and they explode and drag enemies to themselves when an enemy approaches. The Remnants study the king's arts, and they search for any distant relatives to continue his bloodline, with their ultimate goal being to resurrect him through a relative and continue his terror. The Witch King was so powerful that he could control the Originium shards within infected and turn them into his own devices by accelerating their oropathy. The Voice of Terra is a musical art that was written and abandoned by the Witch King in the past. It is believed that this could be the key to letting him possess a blood relative, possibly resurrecting himself. Because of this, following the death of the king, the remnants kidnapped some of his bloodline and forcefully implanted the voice inside their heads. Due to the enormous influence, most of the subjects died. The only two left were Kraid and Ebenholz. Kraid was implanted with an imperfect tone that kind of leaks out, and Ebenholz was implanted with a pretty weak yet perfect tone. It was assumed Kraid could not handle the voice and died, and was tossed aside as a corpse. There's more information on Kraid, but I'm kind of getting a bit off topic already, and I'm going to end it about there. Eventually, Ebenholz did learn Kraid was alive. If you want more information, feel free to check out the fandom wiki because it's pretty interesting. Anyway, in regards to implanting the voice, it's pretty unknown how exactly this works, as the medical checkups on Ebenholz and his brain scans show nothing abnormal. The Twin Empresses are viewed so highly in the world that Victoria gives respect. However, not everyone respects them. Mainly the remaining Witch King's remnants, who believe they are the usurpers of the throne. They believe the Twin Empresses are personally responsible for the purge of the king's family, despite their efforts to save any relatives, especially children. During a raid on a remnant lab, they rescued a young Ebenholz, secretly known as the last descendant of the Witch King. They restored some of his status out of pity, with the excuse being that they can keep a constant watch on him to avoid another Witch King. But their mercy came at a price of frequent brainwashing by the Empress's supporter to blindly praise him. That is a lot of information to process. It's been about 8 minutes, and I just spent probably half that talking about not even Ebenholz. But let's continue. Ebenholz was not content with his current life, being groomed to be a noble in a land that he had no real interest in, with remnants constantly wanting to turn him into their beloved yet terrifying king. Over time, he has noticed that he's become a puppet to praise the Empresses by the new Kurfürsten, the guys who elect the rulers. Eventually, he learned of Kraid being alive, and the two met up. Over a bit of time, they became best friends. Kraid thoroughly enjoyed playing the flute, and Ebenholz enjoyed playing the cello. Even though he's now got a friend, he still wants to give up his nobility and live a normal life amongst commoners. In fact, he was so fed up with his current life that he arranged a plan with Gertrude Strollo, a woman who serves the current Vyseheim noble. He was invited to participate in Caesarni's farewell musical performance, performing with Kraid so that they would become Caesarni's disciples. The goal was to extract the voice from his head and completely erase his identity. However, unbeknownst to them all, it would become a huge disaster. It ended up being a plot by Gertrude and it was in fact a ceremonial ritual in hopes to revive the Witch King. Gertrude is stabbed to death during this, but it was too late. The performance ended up killing thousands of local infected by reawakening the voice inside Ebenholz and Kraid. The voices, now leaking heavily from the two descendants, quickly accelerate the oropathy among the audience. Kraid steps forward to let the voice possess his body, and his oropathy accelerates. He begins to transform into a monstrous being, and the town is terrified. His mind is slowly consumed, and he proudly asks Ebenholz to end his life and stop this once and for all, hopefully. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately for the world overall, the performance ends with Kraid's death. This is where Ebenholz contracted his oropathy, saying goodbye to his now dead cousin and best friend. Despite this major disaster, the voices still lingered inside Ebenholz's head as the Witch King calls him a weakling. Both Ebenholz and Cizerne lose their fame as musicians and all their wealth and move to Rhodes Island to help. Despite not being named, nobody will forget the heroic symphony that ended the Vyseheim disaster. Hibiscus actually played a pretty major role in helping the infected but not yet dead audience during this event, and she's actually the one who recommended Cizerne and Ebenholz to stay at Rhodes Island. Nowadays, Ebenholz provides offensive support on the battlefield with his Originium arts, and according to his physical exam, his strength and mobility are all standard. However, his Originium assimilation is referred to as outstanding, a stat shared with operators like Ifrit and Skyfire. Currently, the voice is somewhat toned down after Kraid's sacrifice, but Ebenholz's greatest fear is that it might be unleashed again one day. Despite all this, he does his best to keep it at bay and avoid becoming the second Witch King. Moving on, his codename Ebenholz is the German word for ebony, a type of black wood that is used in many instruments, including his prized cello. The fact that this evil king was a Caprone race was likely no coincidence, with goats frequently being associated with Satan and witchcraft in Western folklore. In his E2 art, we can see two figures that appear to resemble himself and Kraid, with a different eye color from the rest and playing their respective instruments. Analyzing his voice lines, at the start of an operation he mentions,
"Prolonged casting makes my headaches flare up, and I even hallucinate if I'm unlucky."
One of his skill activations causes him to say,
"Hinfort aus meinem Kopf!"
which means, "Stay away from my head!" exclamation point. When you tap him in the bass, he will say,
Here it is again. Huh? It's you, Doctor? That wasn't the headache?
Overall, I was not expecting his lore to be this interesting. I'm actually pretty bummed out, not gonna lie, but I'm happy I had to share some information on our depressed goat Twink. It is especially saddening to know that even after all that, it seems there's not much hope in his eyes. He's mainly trying to keep his ancestors at bay, and the loss of his best friend accompanied by his distrust of people due to the brainwashing makes him hard to talk to and distant. I don't think he has many friends at Rhodes Island, but his file does mention that he's able to talk with a couple people aside from the doctor. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, he mainly enjoys playing the cello and plays sorrowful music. I believe it should be pretty obvious why now. I'd probably play depressing music too after all that. Family purged, best friend killed, kidnapped by remnants and brainwashed by the Empresses, constant voice in his head calling him pathetic, no place for him in his home country, all which were due to a king he likely never even met in person. Let's just hope the Witch King never gets revived and causes another reign of terror.
I once was a dreamer, but then I grew up and saw the